The last thing Claire remembered before the tires screeched was the hum of the radio, soft, forgettable, the kind of background noise that didn't match the pulse pounding in her throat. The SUV skidded on the gravel shoulder, fishtailing before it found traction again. She gripped the wheel tighter, her knuckles bloodless against the leather. Behind her, the highway stretched like a long bruise, vanishing into the rain-smeared mountains. She didn't stop driving until the sun had disappeared completely. No headlights followed, no sign of him, not yet. Claire's breath shuddered from her chest as she turned down a side road she didn't recognize. A cracked wooden sign, half obscured by moss, pointed toward Pine Hollow cabins. She didn't know if it was open. She didn't care. She needed somewhere with a door that locked, somewhere far enough away that his name wouldn't mean anything. The cabins weren't much. A scattering of weather-worn structures nestled in a clearing ringed with evergreens, the kind of place people visited for silence or for hiding. She parked beneath a skeletal birch and sat in the car for a long minute, hands trembling in her lap. The air was cold, but it felt clean. She hadn't realized how much she needed clean. The office was a wooden hut with one light glowing inside. A bell jingled as she opened the door, and a man looked up from behind a desk. He wasn't what she expected, not elderly, not exactly young. Broad-shouldered in a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His beard was trimmed, his hair too long to be city neat. But it wasn't his appearance that made her pause. It was the way he looked at her, like he noticed everything. Like she wasn't just a woman in trouble, but someone with a story he was already halfway through reading. "Evening," he said. "You lost." She opened her mouth to lie, then closed it again. "I need a place to stay, just for a while." He didn't ask why. He reached for a set of keys from the wall. "Cabin 4's empty. Has heat, water, no working internet. Best I can offer." Claire stepped forward, reaching for her wallet. "No charge tonight," he said. "You look like you've been driving since yesterday." She hesitated, unsure whether to feel insulted or grateful. Then she said, "Thank you," because it was the first real kindness she'd been offered in months. He handed over the keys. His fingers brushed hers, warm and calloused. "Name's Eli." She told him hers, but the syllables felt strange on her tongue. She was Claire Maddox here, not the wife of a political golden boy, not the woman whose bruises didn't show on camera. Here, maybe, she was just someone tired enough to start over. The cabin was simple. Wood-paneled walls, a fireplace that smelled faintly of pine smoke, a small kitchen with mismatched mugs. She dropped her bag and leaned against the door, pressing her forehead to the cool frame. Outside, the night was quiet, too quiet. She wasn't used to silence. Her ears strained for the ping of a text, the bark of his voice echoing down a hallway, but all she heard was wind and the distant cry of an owl. Claire took a shower that steamed the windows, then curled into the flannel sheets. She didn't sleep so much as drift in and out of watchfulness, jolting at every crack of the cabin or gust of wind that shook the eaves. She woke to the scent of coffee. A knock came, soft but firm. She froze, her breath caught. "It's Eli," came the voice. "Brought you breakfast, don't mean to intrude." She opened the door just wide enough to take the tray. A thermos, scrambled eggs, toast, and jam. No questions, no demands, just food. Her eyes met his through the sliver of open door. He didn't look away. Later that day, she sat on the porch steps, watching the sun burn through the morning fog. Eli was out splitting logs near the main office, methodical and precise. He hadn't looked at her again, not directly, but she felt it anyway, the way his awareness followed her, the way he moved like someone who knew what it was to carry secrets. She told herself she'd leave the next day, she even packed, but morning came and she stayed. A week passed. She started helping around the grounds, cleaning, painting the porch rails, folding laundry for the other cabins. It gave her hands something to do, gave her mind something to rest against besides memories. Eli never pried, never flirted, but she caught him watching sometimes, not with hunger, not with pity, just seeing. And for reasons she couldn't explain, that scared her more than anything. One morning, she woke to find her car gone. Panic sliced through her as she stumbled outside in boots not fully laced. She turned toward the office, breath hitching. Eli stood beside the truck with grease on his hands. "Relax," he said. "Took it to change your oil. Tires were bald. I replaced them. You're safe for now." She stared at him. Why would you do that?" He didn't answer, just handed her the keys and wiped his hands on a rag. "You said you weren't staying long. Figured I'd make sure you could leave when you were ready." She didn't know what to say to that. The cabin felt different when she returned, like she was both more alone and less. That night she sat outside past midnight, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. Eli didn't join her, but his porch light stayed on until she went inside. Then one afternoon, a car pulled up. Claire was hanging laundry in the wind. Her blood turned to ice when she recognized the make, a sleek black Audi. She dropped the sheet she was folding, backing toward the cabin without meaning to. Eli was already moving. He stepped in front of her just enough to block her from view. The man who climbed out of the Audi wasn't her husband, but he was someone she recognized, a fixer. One of Evan's shadowed helpers, clean suit, sunglasses, that shark-like stillness that said he never moved unless it mattered. "I'm looking for someone," the man said. "She's not here," Eli replied. The fixer's jaw tensed. "You don't know who I'm talking about." Eli's voice didn't change. "Doesn't matter, she's not here." The man studied him, then Claire, who had frozen behind the porch rail. She wasn't sure if he saw her, but Eli didn't flinch, didn't move. Eventually, the man left. Claire's knees gave out. She sat hard on the top step, heart in her throat. "He'll come back," she whispered. Eli didn't argue, but he said something else. "If you want to disappear for real, I know a guy who does that kind of work. Doesn't ask questions. New name, new plates. It's not cheap, but it's clean." She looked up at him. "Why are you helping me?" His gaze was steady. "Because you're not the first person who's come here running, and because if I were you, I'd want someone to stand in the doorway too." He walked away after that, but Claire didn't move. She stayed until the wind chilled her to the bone. That night she dreamed of her wedding day, the way Evan had held her hand so tightly it bruised, how everyone thought it looked like passion, how she had smiled so hard her cheeks ached. When she woke, she stared at the ceiling for a long time. She didn't know it yet, but she wasn't going to run anymore. She was going to fight. Claire didn't leave the cabin the next morning. The bedsheets were tangled from her restless sleep, her breath still shallow from the dream that hadn't entirely let go. Outside, birds called to one another in the trees. Inside, she stood barefoot on the wood floor, the cold seeping up her legs as if trying to remind her she was still here, still in a place that hadn't collapsed around her yet. She didn't know what she expected after yesterday. Maybe for Eli to distance himself, maybe for the silence to grow teeth. But by mid-morning there was a quiet knock at the door, and when she opened it, he was there again, this time holding a toolbox. "Sink still leaking?" he asked, not waiting for an answer as he stepped inside. It was. She'd fixed it herself 2 days ago, but she didn't tell him that. She let him kneel by the cabinet, let him pretend he was there for something else. The hum of his presence steadied something jagged in her, though she hated that it did. "You always watch people this closely?" she asked finally, sitting on the edge of the table. He didn't glance up, only when they act like they don't want anyone to. She almost laughed. It was a small, startled sound that cracked in her throat. "Is that your specialty, calling people out without saying much?" "No," he tightened something beneath the sink. "My specialty is knowing when to keep my mouth shut." That made her look at him, really look. Eli had the kind of stillness that came from hard-earned patience. It wasn't the brooding, performative kind her husband used when cameras were on him. It was deeper than that, like he knew how to let pain pass through him without chasing it. He closed the cabinet and stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You eating today?" "I wasn't planning to." "You are now. Chili's on at the main house. Figured I'd make enough for two." She followed him because she didn't want to go back to her thoughts. The main house was larger, older, clearly built in a time when people didn't rush things. Its windows caught the afternoon light in amber shafts. A fire burned low in the hearth, and something rich and familiar simmered on the stove. Claire hovered near the doorway while Eli ladled steaming bowls and set them on the table. He didn't press her to sit. He didn't ask anything about yesterday. When she finally lowered herself into the seat across from him, she noticed how he waited until she picked up her spoon before he did the same. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It moved like a river, quiet, purposeful, going somewhere even when it seemed still. "Where'd you learn to cook?" she asked between bites. "Army, mostly. Then years of living where takeout doesn't deliver." She nodded, grateful for the normalcy, for the mundane conversation that asked nothing from her soul. A few bites later, he spoke again. "You don't flinch as much when people come around now." Her hand paused. "You notice everything, don't you?" "I notice what matters." That time she did laugh, short and bitter. "You don't even know me. I know you sleep with a chair wedged under the doorknob. I know you check every car that pulls up like it might be him. And I know you don't wear your ring, but you still touch that finger when you think no one's looking." Claire stared at him, and he didn't flinch under her gaze. "But I also know," he continued, "you've got good instincts. You helped that kid last week when he fell off the swing. You made sure I got back the right set of keys when Mrs. Howard lost hers. You remembered which screws I used to fix the railing and handed them to me before I asked." He leaned back. "You're paying attention, even if you don't want to." She hated how much she wanted to cry just then. Instead, she stood and began clearing the bowls. He didn't stop her. Over the next few days, something unspoken shifted. Claire found herself walking the trails behind the cabins, letting the forest air fill her lungs. The solitude didn't claw at her as much anymore. She began to write in a notebook she hadn't touched since college. Sometimes it was nothing, grocery lists, half-remembered lyrics. Other times it was more. One morning she came into the office and found Eli sanding a broken table. Without asking, she picked up a cloth and started wiping down the wood dust beside him. They worked in easy silence. That evening he walked her back to her cabin, not because she needed protection, but because it had become their quiet ritual. She stood at the door a moment longer than usual, then turned. "Do you ever regret staying here?" she asked. Eli shook his head once. "The only thing I regret is not getting out sooner." She didn't ask where he'd come from, what war, what loss, what woman. A storm came the next day. Hard rain, loud enough to muffle thoughts. The wind pushed through the trees like it had something to say. Claire stayed inside and let herself feel it all. The fear, the weariness, the tangled ache of remembering who she used to be before her life had been hollowed out and repackaged. Late that night, after the worst had passed, someone knocked. She opened the door and found Eli soaked through, holding a lantern and a tangle of blankets. "Power out, thought you might want extra covers." He didn't leave when she took them. She stepped aside, and without a word he came in and sat on the edge of the couch while she lit the fire. Rain beat against the roof. When she sat beside him, it was cautious, unsure, but he didn't move away. "Were you always like this?" she asked, quiet, unshakable. His mouth lifted slightly at the corner. "I was a kid once, loud, angry, thought I knew better. And now I know better." She looked down at her hands. Her voice was soft. "You make it feel like I can breathe again." Eli didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed on the fire. But when he finally turned to her, his expression was unreadable. Not cold, just careful. "I'm not here to fix anything, Claire. I can't promise you safety or absolution." She nodded, heart pounding. "But I can sit with you while you remember what safety feels like." She didn't know who leaned in first. Maybe neither of them did, but her forehead found his shoulder and his hand found hers. Not with urgency, not with possession. Just the quiet knowing that some nights it was enough to be held in a place where no one asked why you were broken. When the fire died down, he stood. "I'll be back in the morning. Make sure the lines didn't go down near the well pump." She wanted to ask him to stay, just for the night, but she didn't, not yet. After he left, she lay under the blankets he'd brought, still warm with the heat of his truck. The silence didn't press this time. It wrapped around her gently. She was still afraid. But for the first time, she wasn't alone in it. 2 weeks passed, and the mornings came easier. Claire began waking up before the alarm she no longer set. She'd slip on her boots, pull on an old sweatshirt Eli had left in a forgotten laundry basket, worn soft, slightly too big, and walk the perimeter trail just after sunrise. The air was cooler now, the kind of cold that made your breath visible, but it felt like something real, something she could count on. Each step steadied her more than the last. Eli never asked where she went during those early hours, but he always had coffee ready when she came back. Sometimes he'd leave it on her porch in that same chipped blue thermos. Other times he'd be in the main house kitchen, elbows deep in repairs or winter prep, handing her a mug without a word. It had become a kind of rhythm, one that neither of them named. On a Monday that smelled like frost, Claire drove to the next town over. It was a risk. Her name might still be known, her face possibly recognized, but she was tired of living like a ghost. She walked into a hardware store and bought a lock for the cabin door. Not because she thought Eli would cross her boundary, but because choosing who got in mattered now. She also picked up nails, twine, and an old set of paintbrushes. When she returned, Eli was repairing a section of fence near the trailhead. He didn't turn when she parked, but his head tilted slightly, the way it did when he'd been waiting for her to come back. She walked over, set the bag of supplies on the split rail. You think I could use one of those sheds, the little one behind the cabins?" He didn't ask why, just nodded. "Long as you don't mind the raccoons watching you work." The shed became hers within a day. She swept out the nests and cobwebs, hung a lantern from a hook on the wall, and began to paint. It wasn't anything grand, just lines at first, color, texture, memory. A woman on a hilltop facing the wind. A child in a yellow raincoat looking up at something too big to name. It came in pieces, but it came. The brush remembered what her body had forgotten. That night, Eli brought her a second-hand easel he'd found in the storage barn. He didn't say much, just carried it in, set it down, and looked at her painting. "That her?" he asked, pointing to the wind-blown figure. She nodded, "I think so." He stood there a moment longer. "You should keep going." It had been years since someone had told her that. Not you should monetize it or you could enter a gallery, but you should keep going, like what she was doing already mattered. She painted every afternoon after that, losing hours in brushstrokes and half-formed images. She started humming again under her breath, like she had before she learned to silence herself. When the wind carried the sound, Eli would sometimes glance toward the shed, then look away just as quickly. The more time passed, the more Claire noticed him in the small ways. He walked the cabins every night before bed, checking locks, flashlight tucked under one arm. He added insulation to the windows without being asked, and he never touched her unless she reached for him first. One night she did. It was raining again, gentler this time, and the two of them stood beneath the office porch, watching water slide off the tin roof. "I used to hate storms," she said. "Now they sound like freedom." Eli was quiet, hands in his pockets. Claire turned toward him. "You ever think about leaving this place?" "Sometimes," he glanced at her. "But then I remember I chose it. Most people don't get that luxury." She stepped closer. "I don't know if I chose this yet." "That's okay," he said. "Doesn't have to be a decision all at once." Claire looked up at him. There was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before, an openness he usually kept locked behind routine and muscle memory. She reached out, fingers finding the edge of his jacket. His breath hitched just slightly before he leaned into her touch. When she kissed him, it wasn't desperate, it was slow, real. A quiet undoing of everything she'd been told love was supposed to feel like. His hand cupped her jaw like it was something sacred. There was no rush in the way his mouth met hers, only presence, permission. When they parted, neither of them moved for a long time. He brushed his thumb along her cheekbone, not quite smiling. "You sure?" She didn't answer. She just kissed him again, slower this time. They didn't sleep together that night, not in the way people usually mean. He walked her back to the cabin and stayed on the couch, legs too long for the frame. She lay in bed and listened to the sound of his breathing. She slept like someone who wasn't waiting for footsteps outside her door. The next morning, Eli was gone before she woke. A note sat on the kitchen counter. "Had to drive into town, back before lunch, left coffee in the thermos, locked the door. E." She smiled, tracing the sharp, slanted handwriting. For the first time in a long time, she felt something soft unfurl in her chest. Not safety, not yet, but the possibility of it. Around noon, she was painting again when she heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Her heart skipped. Not every sound meant danger anymore, but the reflex hadn't left her. When she looked out the window, she saw the truck, not the Audi, not anything sleek or black. But the man who stepped out wasn't Eli. It was someone else, taller, lean, mid-40s, with a suit jacket that didn't belong in the woods. He knocked twice before opening the shed door, like it was his right. "Claire," he said, voice smooth as silk and colder than ice. "It's time to go home." Her fingers gripped the paintbrush like a weapon. "I'm not going anywhere with you." He stepped inside. "You think this place protects you, you think he can." She backed toward the shelf, trying to remember if she'd left her phone nearby. "You don't understand the position you've put him in," the man said. "You're not the only one Evan has eyes on. People who shelter you, they stop being safe real fast." Claire's stomach twisted. "Get out." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You've got one day. After that, we stop asking nicely." He turned and left, footsteps crunching in deliberate slowness. She waited until the truck pulled out of the lot before she ran, not to her cabin, not to the office. She took the trail, the shortcut through the trees, boots slipping on wet leaves until the forest spat her out by the supply barn. She slammed into Eli the moment he opened the door. He caught her, steadying her arms. "What?" "Someone came," she said, gasping. "Not Evan, but one of them. He said they'd hurt you if I stay." Eli's expression didn't change much, but his jaw locked, his eyes darkened. He led her into the barn and shut the door. "I can disappear," Claire said, pacing. "You said you knew someone who could do it clean. Maybe it's time." Eli shook his head. "You don't run now, not this time. They want you to believe they're untouchable. They're not. They're powerful. So are you." Her hands trembled. "I don't want you to get hurt because of me." He stepped closer. "You're not the reason I'd be hurt, they are." Silence fell between them. Rain tapped on the roof above, just as it had the night they first touched. "I have someone," Eli said after a moment. "Old contact. He works in federal investigations. Used to be deep in political corruption cases. If I give him something solid, names, patterns, enough to justify a deeper look, he'll move on it. Quietly." Claire stared. "You think that'll be enough?" "I think if we do nothing, you'll never stop running." The storm inside her had gone quiet. For the first time, she didn't feel like prey. She felt like someone standing on the edge of a decision that could actually change something. "I have evidence," she said softly. "Emails, passwords, bank accounts. I copied them before I left." Eli's eyes met hers. "Then it's time to make them regret underestimating you." She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this: she wasn't leaving. Not when staying finally meant something. By the following morning, the forest held its breath. Claire moved through the day like someone learning to walk again, not with fear, but with a steadiness born of choice. Eli hadn't slept, she could tell. His eyes were rimmed with quiet exhaustion, the kind that came not from dread but from preparation. He didn't complain, he never did, but she caught him looking at her differently now, not like she was fragile, but like she'd just shown him something he didn't expect. They didn't talk much over breakfast. There were too many tasks that didn't allow for small talk. Claire organized the files she'd stored on a hidden drive, triple-checking each folder: bank transfers, speech drafts, donation receipts that didn't match their public declarations. There were details in the margins, ones she hadn't realized were important at the time. Now she saw the pattern. Eli spoke briefly with someone over the phone, using clipped phrases she didn't understand, half-coded, half instinct. "No, she stays out of sight. You get the trail first. I'll follow. 36 hours tops." When he hung up, he looked at her like he could see straight through the armor she'd carefully rebuilt. It's in motion. Once it starts, there's no pulling back. Claire nodded. I don't want to pull back. The cabin became a bunker. They didn't talk about what might happen if things went wrong. Instead, they readied for the best version of the worst. That night she found Eli in the woodshed sharpening tools that hadn't been used all season. He didn't look up when she entered, but his presence shifted, like he knew it was her before she spoke. I can't remember the last time I trusted anyone, she said. I think maybe I never did, not fully. He set down the blade. You trusted yourself, that counts. I didn't, not really. I let things happen to me for so long I started thinking maybe I deserved them. He turned toward her. In the dim light his face looked rough, unfinished, like something shaped by grief and fire and time. You didn't deserve any of it. Her eyes met his and she stepped closer. You scare me sometimes, she admitted. Not in the way Evan did, it's different, like, you see things I don't want anyone to see. I don't see anything you don't show me. That's the thing I keep showing you. Eli's breath was shallow now. He hadn't moved, but something in him had changed, something quiet and unmistakable. Claire. I'm not saying this because I'm scared, she said. I'm not saying it because I need to be rescued. I'm saying it because I want to. And then she kissed him. It wasn't the first time, but it felt different. Less like a question, more like a beginning. His hands found her waist. He didn't pull, didn't press, just held. They moved through the dark like they'd done this before, like the aching space between them had finally stopped asking if it was safe to close. They didn't make love that night because they had something to prove or because the future looked clean. They did it because everything else had fallen away, and what remained was this truth. Healing wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was breath shared between two people in the dark. Sometimes it was hands that didn't demand but waited. When Claire woke beside him the next morning, her first thought wasn't fear. It was warmth. Then her phone buzzed. The message was from an unknown number. Check the news. She dressed quickly, boots on, heart racing. Eli was already up, sitting on the porch with a mug in hand. His eyes flicked to hers when she stepped outside. I think it's starting, she said. He nodded once. Let's find out. They sat together at the office desk, laptop open between them. Claire clicked through headlines. A government official linked to illegal campaign funds, possible offshore laundering. Allegations of violence swept under political rugs. The pictures were grainy, the names redacted, but one line made her stop breathing. Sources confirm a former aide is cooperating with authorities. Her name wasn't mentioned, yet. But Eli leaned forward, scanning the text. That's them rattling the cage, seeing who bolts first. Claire leaned back, her throat was dry. What if this makes it worse? It might, he said, or it might break the facade. They spent the day watching the storm unfold from afar. Calls came to the front desk, inquiries from journalists who'd heard whispers. No one gave a name, but the tone was always the same, curious, cautious, digging. Claire didn't answer any of them. The next night, as frost thickened on the windows and the wind coiled through the trees, headlights cut through the dark. A car pulled up to the main office. Not the Audi, not a threat. A woman stepped out, mid-30s, no makeup, tired eyes. She moved like someone who'd been carrying secrets too long. "You're Claire," she said when she came inside. I don't know what you mean. I'm not Press, the woman said, setting her phone down. I'm one of the people Evan tried to ruin, and I think it's time someone made sure your story gets told the right way. Eli stood behind the desk, silent, watching. Claire didn't say yes that night, but she didn't say no. They walked the woman out together, the chill clinging to their jackets. When she drove away, the forest seemed to inhale again. You okay? Eli asked. Claire turned to him. No, but I think I will be. They returned to the cabin in silence. That night she didn't paint. She sat on the floor with Eli back against the bed, knees pulled to her chest. They talked not about the case or the danger, but about childhood, about old music and forgotten smells and the food you miss most when you're sad. You think this ends with them going down? She asked eventually. I think you're stronger than you were when this started. She rested her head on his shoulder. I want to stay, she said. After, if there's an after, I want to see what this place feels like when I'm not afraid of it. He took her hand. Then stay. The wind outside was louder now, but the fire held. So did they. Winter came earlier than anyone expected. It arrived not with a dramatic snowstorm, but slowly, creeping frost along window panes, the way breath misted when Claire opened the door in the morning, how the birds grew quieter each day. The world around Pine Hollow turned inward, as if bracing for something, and Claire did too. She spent more time outside, even in the cold. Her walks became longer, deeper into the woods. There was a kind of stillness out there that didn't ask for anything. Sometimes she'd find herself at the edge of the lake, frozen over now, and think about the version of herself who had driven here with shaking hands and a duffel bag stuffed in panic. That woman had been afraid of her own shadow. Now, Claire felt like she could finally stand in the sun without flinching. The investigation moved in ripples. There were subpoenas, arrests, a wave of media that reached farther than she thought it would. Still no names in the headlines, still no direct links to her. But the whispers were turning into something louder. The machine that had once protected Evan had started to eat itself, and Claire stood just outside the wreckage, watching it collapse. One afternoon, while stacking firewood outside her cabin, she spotted Eli coming up the trail with 2 mugs in hand. His hair was wind-blown, cheeks pink from the cold, and the quiet grin he wore was the one he gave her when he was trying not to look too relieved she was still there. He handed her a mug. You're worse than me, out here in the snow like it doesn't matter. Claire blew on the coffee. It doesn't, not really, not compared to what used to matter. They sat on the porch step together, shoulders brushing, mugs warming their hands. There's something I've been thinking about, she said. Yeah. This place, it gives people space. Room to breathe, to feel things they buried a long time ago. It did that for me. I wonder if it could do it for others too, people like me, people running but ready to stop. Eli looked at her. You want to turn Pine Hollow into a shelter. She nodded slowly. Not officially, not with a sign on the road, just offer a place when someone needs one, quietly, like you did for me. He didn't speak for a while, just sipped his coffee, watched the trees sway under their snowy coats. Then he nodded. I think this place could hold that kind of grace. Claire's eyes stung suddenly. I didn't think I'd find anything after him. I thought everything would just feel like not drowning. Eli reached for her hand, tugged it into his lap. You're not just surviving anymore, Claire, you're rebuilding. She leaned into him, head on his shoulder. You ever think you'd have a life like this? "No," he said softly, "but I think I waited for it without knowing I was." That night she brought him a painting, unfinished but close. It was a winter scene, snow falling on a cabin porch, two figures on the steps, their silhouettes soft, faces turned toward the woods. Eli looked at it for a long time. "This us?" he asked. "Maybe it's who we'll be." He didn't kiss her then. He just held her close, his hand on the small of her back, as if he understood what it meant to dream of something without demanding it. Days passed, the media finally named her. Claire Maddox, wife of embattled Senator Evan Maddox, has come forward with documents that may alter the scope of the investigation. Her face appeared briefly on the news. Her old life came calling like a ghost, but this time it had nowhere to land. No reporters came to Pine Hollow, no black cars. Eli had taken care of that, routes rerouted, records blurred, favors called in from people who knew how to disappear entire corners of the map. One night after the first real snowfall, Claire stood on the porch watching the world soften under white. The lake had gone still, a sheet of pearl under the moon. Inside, Eli was making stew. Music played low on the old radio he'd found in a closet. She didn't call it peace. Peace was too clean, too final. But it was quiet, it was steady, and it felt like something she could choose every day without fear. Eli stepped outside behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, chin on her shoulder. Neither of them spoke. The snow fell without hurry. And in that silence, Claire finally understood. She hadn't run away to save herself. She had run toward the life she hadn't known she could ask for. And now she had it, a cabin, a man who never took his eyes off her, not to control her but to see her, entirely, the version of her that had learned to stay and stay for good. And she wasn't going anywhere.